well, and I appreciate you joining us tonight, and hopefully I can share some information that helps you to understand and feel more comfortable with how paying for college and the financial aid process. So as we go through tonight, I'm going to try and do a variety of different things. So first, looking at how do we define financial aid? What are the sources of assistance? What are the types of assistance? How do we apply for aid? So I'm not going to go line through line of the free application for federal student aid, but certainly we'll take a look at some of the key components of what I'd like you to know. And then what if my circumstances have changed? And what are your next steps as a family? So I'll try and break a little bit between each. So if either Brad or Kevin have questions that they think are important that we address right away, we'll do that. Or as they said, we'll just kind of keep on going through the materials because it may be that it's further into the presentation. So again, just want to start with some general information for you. Expectation of parents and students. The first thing you need to be doing is the student needs to be applying for admission. And I'm sure that Mr. Kane and Mr. Coy would appreciate the sooner than later because I know they have a lot of parts of the application process to do. So making sure that the student is applying for admission. And I'm specifically talking for seniors. So most of my comments tonight are going to be directed at seniors. If there are parents or students who are juniors or sophomores or even first-year students, good for you for joining us tonight so you can get a leg up on trying to understand this information. So again, applying for admission is one of the first steps. And I say that sometimes what I'll see is families want to say, well, I don't want you to apply to that school because I'm not sure we're going to have the finances or resources to be able for you to be able to go there. That's kind of the cart before the horse. So you need to be applying for admission, and most schools are going to give a formal offer of financial aid after the student has been admitted. Another one of the cautions that I think is really important is don't cross a school off of the student's list just based on the sticker price that you see on a website or in a brochure. Why? Because financial aid is intended to bridge the gap between your resources and the cost of a particular school. What I say to families is if you never apply for admission, you're never really going to know the answer if you were admissible or not. If you never apply for financial aid, you're not going to know your answer. Don't compare yourself to your neighbor or someone else. You need to find out the answer for yourself. Have an honest, open conversation as a family of finances and where they fit, and how far can your family budget go? And again, as I say, when you're looking at a college at the bottom of the slide, I really would encourage you to think about the academic fit for the student, the social fit, as well as the financial fit. So whether it's a 1-year, 2-year, 4-year degree, make sure you're thinking holistically about the decision that's going to be made. Complete the required financial aid forms. And again, I'm going to get into a little bit later the form or forms that schools may be asking you to complete. And then know the deadlines for financial aid. Every school, you're going to find there might be something just a little bit different about the forms they're requiring or the dates that they're wanting. Are they dates? Are they deadlines? Are they priorities? So understanding, I call it the language of financial aid because there is a distinct language surrounding this process, and it can feel like an unknown language to many families. So again, hopefully we can talk through some of the quirky words and terms that are used in financial aid. And again, deadlines versus priority dates is one of those kind of key things that I would encourage you to find out. I'm big on spreadsheets. So again, I would look at maybe if there are 5 or more schools or however many schools the student is applying to, create a spreadsheet. Put those dates on the spreadsheet. Put the things like the applications that are used on there. When did you send those in? Where did you send them? So those kinds of things to help keep track of the financial aid process in addition to the admissions process. I want to define both need-based financial aid and non-need financial aid, sometimes called merit aid. So I'm going to focus the majority of my time with you tonight on need-based financial aid. And that is determined through an application process and a formula or formulas. And again, we'll get into those shortly. Non-need-based aid is usually offered based on academics or a special talent. It might be leadership or athletics or music or art ability or community service, whatever. Need-based aid also might have, or merit aid might have some of these components, and some also have a need-based component. But again, there are two major types of aid. Need-based, based on a formula, looking at an assessment of income and assets, and then non-need-based aid that is offered. They can coexist in a financial aid offer, so they don't have to be mutually exclusive. The term cost of attendance, or COA, is one that financial aid offices will use. This is such a point of confusion for so many families. This is not your bill. What the cost of attendance is that is an estimation of what 1 year at a particular institution may cost. Most schools are going to use either actual information for something like tuition and fees, or they might use something like an average cost of room and meals. Those are what we call direct costs, or something the student accounts or bursar's office are going to send on a bill to the family, right? Then there's that other column where it says indirect costs. Regardless of where the student goes, the student is going to incur expenses for transportation. How am I going to get to the school if I'm going to go to school in New York State and I live in Chicagoland? What's that cost? Or maybe I'm going to stay in the Chicago area, my transportation goes down. So again, these are indirect. The family, the student, the parent, you're going to spend money on transportation. It's just how much, what's the estimate of what you'd spend? Not a specific bill, but you're going to have some outlay of cash to do that. Miscellaneous or personal expenses. Students going to do laundry, especially if they're living on campus, they're going to do laundry. Hopefully they'll take part in things like clubs on campus or athletic activities, or maybe go out and go to a dance or things like that. So those are the personal expenses. And then certainly books, a foundation of having a successful college career, buying the books that the student needs. So again, usually a bill is not going to be sent for any of those, but when we think about determining financial need, we look at all of those costs together to say, this is what the average student might spend if they attend my institution for a year. The next part of determining need is what is called the expected family contribution. So just like cost of attendance, you're not going to get a bill for all of the components in the cost of attendance. This family contribution is also very confusing because it too is not your bill. So again, as I said, you might spend money on transportation. That could be part of the expected family contribution that is calculated. So what the family contribution is to be a measurement of the students and the family's financial resources, or translated into what they might be able to pay toward education expenses. And there's two parts. There's the student is expected to contribute and the parent is expected to contribute toward education, and together it's called the family contribution. The primary formula, so I said earlier, the need-based aid is based on a formula. Well, that formula is called the federal methodology, and it is created by and updated by the United States Congress and the Department of Education. and that formula determines the expected family contribution, which is an annual assessment. As I said, it's not going to be the same as the bill that you get from the student account office. The FAFSA, or the Free Application for Federal Student Aid, is the form that is used to run the federal methodology and make the determination of the family contribution. That application is completed online at fafsa.gov. Warning, do not use fafsa.com business. This is a free form. Make sure you're going to fafsa.gov. You should not be paying a fee for this application. It is to be free of charge for you to do this. This form is used for all federal programs, all Illinois state grant programs, and it's used by all colleges and universities. So this is the foundational form, again, completed annually. If you have more than one student in college at a time, there is a FAFSA that is done for each student because it is the student's application that also includes parent information. So determining financial need another way is called institutional methodology. And this is a tool that was created by financial aid officers in the country, and it is sustained by the College Board and its members. So you're probably more familiar with the College Board as SATs or AP. They also have tools for schools to use to determine financial need, also scholarship opportunities. So the College Board does a lot more than simply testing. So the formula that is used in institutional methodology is very different than the federal methodology. So it includes more information about assets. It also provides the opportunity for the family to share special circumstances. Things like, am I paying private tuition for other children? Or do I have someone with exceptional medical expenses? Do I live in an expensive area like Chicago, right? Much more expensive than South Bend, Indiana. That methodology adjusts for things like cost of living, where the FAFSA methodology or federal methodology does not do that. The CSS profile also is completed online. It's used by about 400 colleges and universities and some private scholarship programs. So in the materials you receive from colleges and universities, see if they require the CSS profile. The College Board also has a list of the schools who require, and some say they just accept but not require the CSS profile. There is a processing fee that is included with the CSS profile. There are automated fee waivers that are embedded right within the application. If a family qualifies, then they receive. So it's not something that you would need to go and ask Mr. Coy or Mr. Kane for a fee waiver. It is embedded in the application itself. So now to put those pieces together that I've defined, and this is how we calculate this financial need. So we take that cost of attendance that we started with, the tuition fees, room and meals, books, supplies, personal expenses, and transportation. So that comprehensive cost for a single year, minus the expected family contribution calculated from the FAFSA, equals financial need. And again, financial need, if that number is a positive number, and I'm going to give some examples in a moment, then that's the difference between your family resources and what you would need for a student to attend a particular school. And need varies from school to school because cost of attendance varies. So here's an example. I just took a public university. Let's say their published cost of attendance. So again, that comprehensive cost, say they publish it at $25,000. The family completes the FAFSA and the contribution for the family comes out to be $5,000. The difference, or what they need, is $20,000. At the private school, cost of attendance for that year, 65. Family contribution came from the FAFSA, so it's the same $5,000. That family would need $60,000 to bridge the gap between that school's cost and their individual resources as a family. So again, understanding how financial need is calculated is an important part of understanding this process. You'll also hear words like school meets need or doesn't meet need. And so I wanted to illustrate for you, what does that really mean for me as a student or as a family? And I had a student a few years ago ask me what happened to unmet need. And I was really stumped by that question. But in his mind, if it was unmet need, it was just going to go away because he knew his family couldn't pay more than that expected family contribution that was calculated. But that is not what happens. And a school that doesn't meet need, it does not mean that they are a bad school. We're all differently resourced. And so there are roughly 60 schools in the country at this time who are able to say that they are what's called need blind, and I'll define that in a minute, and meet full need. So again, the majority of the schools in the country do not have resources to meet full demonstrated need. And again, we'll talk about resources and how you put those things together if a school is not able to meet demonstrated need up front. So when we hear about need blind or need aware schools, that means need blind. Financial resources are not considered at all in the admission process of the student. So the student is admitted specifically on their academic performance throughout high school. Some schools want to be transparent and say, we want to be able to meet need, or we want to be able to meet the majority of financial need, and to do so, we have to limit the population or the number of students who have a specific amount of need or greater. So they tell schools, right, or students up front, we take financial circumstances into account for, and usually that's defined. So at Notre Dame, for example, we are need blind for all of our domestic students. We are need aware for our international students. So again, need aware means students choose a path. They either say, Notre Dame, I want you to consider my application for admission based on I can pay and you don't need to have my financial information. If I'm admitted, my family has the resources. Or the student chooses a path of, I want to be considered for admission and I need financial aid to be able to attend your school. So again, that's Notre Dame. If there are other schools you're looking at, these would be questions that you would want to ask. Do you meet full need? Are you need blind? Are you need aware? Again, usually you'll find that information out on a website, or again, you've got great resources in Mr. Coy or Mr. Kane who can help you with that information. They've got a lot of experience with the various schools and policies. So as we look at what it means on the slide with the yellow, or on the columns with the yellow, these are the same examples from the prior slide. So the family contribution, 5,000, they needed 20. The school offered 10, and I'm not prescribing how. It might have been all scholarship, it might have been in scholarship work and loans, whatever, but this family needed 20,000. They were given 10, so they have unmet need of 10,000. Well, that unmet need is added to the original family contribution, And that family will have an outlay of resources, again, toward the build expenses and the other things like transportation, personal expenses, or books, totaling about $15,000. A school that meets need is going to offer that full amount of demonstrated need. Again, how? Every school does something different, just as the school that meets need. It might be a combination of grants, scholarship, work, loan. It might be work, loan, or all scholarship. It just depends upon the school. But again, the concept and understanding, what does it mean to meet financial need? And then if it's unmet need, what are my resources, how I would pay my unmet need, and in both cases, how do I finance my family share? Some tools that are out there for you would be the FAFSA Forecaster. It's a free tool. It runs the federal methodology, and it can give you an idea of what would your calculated contribution be. And so I pulled the slide out, I think, of what it was at each of the different schools. But the FAFSA Forecaster is one, and if you just type that into a browser, you can enter that. If you go to, maybe you're looking at the University of Illinois, this is what their net price calculator asks for, or looks like, pardon me. And again, we don't talk in these words as consumer. Net price, what does that mean? Well, it's tuition and fees minus scholarships or gift money. So one of the things that was interesting was I did run their University of Illinois net price calculator, and I used a family of 4 people with 1 in college. Their income income was about $100-some thousand. I gave parents about $15,000 in assets, and the student had $1,200 in income. Their cost of attendance was $33,060, and what came out was that family profile with 1 in college, they would get about $2,100, close to $2,100 in terms of grants and scholarship, and the rest was going to be out of family pocket. So again, this is one of the places that you'll see that the sticker price may not be the least expensive institution. These tools, the net price calculator and the FAFSA forecaster, will give you a good sense. There's another tool that a number of private colleges, Notre Dame is one of those, that uses what's called My Intuition. And that is it's not running the actual formula. I won't go into the details, but it's 6 questions. I love it because it's only 6 questions, while the net price calculators are a little longer. But again, I'd encourage you to try and use some of these tools and see what you think. Not to make you afraid, just to give you an idea of how the process might work, or what might happen if next year my child goes on to college and there are 2 in college, and the following year there's only 1 in college. You can run that information through something like the net price calculator, because it's going to do a calculation of the family contribution and also provide an estimate of what kind and type of aid will be offered at that institution. So these are tools, they're not specific answers. So again, I think they give some good information, but you really need to go through the school to get the specific financial aid offer. So now I want to stop. I don't know, Mr. Kane or Mr. Coy, or any of the questions that were submitted about directly related to those things that we just went through.
There's a couple of questions in here, but I don't know if it's necessarily related to what you talked about. One of the questions that we have is, why do merit scholarships request the FAFSA? I worry that they use the information to disqualify students that, in their opinion, don't need the money. A family's income should be irrelevant for merit scholarships.
That's very true. Most merit scholarships, I don't know of merit scholarships that do require it. Perhaps my wording wasn't good when I said merit scholarships and need-based aid can be together. So sometimes you might find a scholarship that includes some of those meritorious or other things that's also a need-based. But merit scholarships exclusively rarely, if ever, require the submission of any kind of application like the FAFSA or the CSS Profile.
And then I guess to piggyback off of that, should students select the box asking whether or not the student is seeking financial aid, even though they are unlikely to receive aid? The family's thought is that it can hurt them in the process.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I'm assuming that is coming off of, is that a Common App question? The two of you are probably more familiar. I know I don't think we asked that. I had worked at a prior institution that asked that. We weren't using the information for admissions purposes. It was more to make sure that we provided information to families about need-based aid. I would ask that question directly. If I was the parent, I would ask that question directly to that admissions office of what's the purpose of this question, especially if you are a need blind institution. Why are you asking me this?
Yeah, I know there's some schools that ask that on their application, so that might be what they're referring to. And then there's another more towards loan repayment. Our older son graduated from HF. He attended Western Michigan this past spring. Students are not required to start repayment until January 31st, 2022. Is it better to start repayment now or wait until the 31st? If he starts paying now and the government votes to forgive a portion of the loans, will he be ineligible because he started repayment?
That's a great question, and I wish I had a crystal ball because I have a child who'd completed a master's degree, and I'm in the same dilemma. I'm going to be a realist, however, and say I cannot imagine Congress forgiving loans. I've been in this business way too long to believe. I'd love to believe that that's going to come true, but I've watched the activity on the House and Senate floor this week, just arguing over $500 and an increase in the federal Pell Grant program. So I'm not going to hold my breath that we're going to have loan forgiveness. A second part to that answer is it depends on what kind of loan are you talking about. Are you talking about a federal direct subsidized loan, which is interest-free during grace period or during the suspended time? Or are you talking about a federal direct unsubsidized loan that could be accruing interest now? If it's an unsubsidized loan, I would start repayment of that loan. If anything, I would pay off interest if there's been any interest accrual. The craziest thing, but not surprising, is you cannot right now set up an auto debit on any federal loan because I've tried, so I know you can't, because there are, as you said, the payments are suspended right now. So the federal loan repayment system won't allow you to do an auto debit, so set it up. You can do one-time pays currently if you want to do that. So again, I would, if I had a better crystal ball, I'd give a different answer, but I'll give you my crystal ball based on over 30 years in this business. So I would start repayment and whittle down that principal if there's interest accruing, especially.
Then one last question. I don't know if you're going to cover this a little bit later, but but the question is there financial aid for students with disabled parents?
Sure, it's a great question. It's going to depend on the school, I would say first. I think in terms of the formula that's used on the FAFSA, families who, if in a disability, I'm assuming it's SSI is the kind of income that might be received. Most likely that family is going to go through a process which is called auto zero. And so there should be pretty significant resources. But specific to a specific disability is probably very specific to a school itself on what kinds of scholarships they might have for that. So let's look at those types and sources of financial aid. And one is gift aid, certainly where you want to go first, scholarships and grants, not subject to repayment. Self-help, loans, and work. Again, I hear a lot of times families say, well, Mary, loans and work aren't financial aid. You need to understand that for the purposes of putting together financial aid offers, they are considered financial aid. So certainly you want to seek out scholarships and grants first. What are the sources? So federal government, your state, so Illinois has a great program. I do not believe, I think they are just like Indiana. You cannot use your Illinois state grant outside of Illinois, so it's not transferable. Colleges and universities are another large source of assistance. Private sources, so maybe it's the local Kiwanis Club, or maybe some alumni groups in the area or whatever, but private sources are another. And some employers also have employee benefits that are given to dependent children. So these are the primary sources. And again, they could come in the form of scholarships, grants, work, loan, especially when we're talking about federal resources. So I'm not going to go through all the federal aid programs, but these are the programs. So again, you'll see that grants would be the federal Pell Grant, the supplemental grant, the Afghanistan service grant, and the TEACH grant. My one comment about TEACH is buyer beware. That grant turns into a loan if the student fails to complete the teaching requirement that comes. And that could go all the way back to when they originally signed the loan. It turns into an unsubsidized loan. So caution on that one. The federal Pell Grant is the cornerstone of the federal grant programs. The criteria right now is if a federal Pell Grant, then a supplemental educational grant. The amount of those is going to vary. And the earlier you apply, the importance of that is that the supplemental grant, those funds can run out. The Pell Grant runs more like an entitlement program. If you qualify, then you receive. Again, there are opportunities for work through the college or university, and then there are the federal student loans, and then the Federal Plus parent loan for undergraduate students. There's a lot more information specific about those out on the Federal Student Aid website that you could learn more about those. This is simply a picture of what your Illinois State Grant website looks like. ISAC is what it's called, and certainly Mr. Kane and Mr. Coy are much more expert about the Illinois State Grant programs than I, so I'm not even going to try and go there. But like I said, the FAFSA is going to be your application for that, and my understanding is, like Indiana, they do not transfer out of state. Colleges and universities. So again, you might see both need-based and merit-based aid. You may find the types of aid coming in gift aid and or self-help. Schools might only use the FAFSA. They might also use the profile, or some schools use what they call an institutional financial aid application. An example that I can think of in Illinois is University of Chicago. My understanding is they use the FAFSA and they have an institutional form. Again, deadlines and application requirements vary by the actual school. Private sources, again, I mentioned foundations, businesses, churches, all kinds of different places. Some of the best resources are going to come from the guidance office at Homewood Flossmoor. The College Board has some resources. I'll show you a slide in a minute with some what I find to be reputable searches. I'm always cautious about, at this time of the year or a little bit later in the year, there are solicitations often that are sent to students. If you pay me this much money, I'll help you find scholarship or grants for college. I would give my buyer beware to that. you can do a lot of research on your own, and you've got good resources to use to help to try and find this money. The first two websites listed on this slide are studentaid.gov, so that would be a good place to find out more information about the federal aid programs, including the question that came in about student loan repayment. There's calculators on there about repayment. There's also a college scorecard, and again, it gives a score, and you can line schools up against one another to look to see. It's intended to be an affordability tool. Big Future is part of the College Board's website where you'd find the CSS profile, but it also gives great resources in terms of financing college education, a lot of frequently asked questions. And the College Board also has, on Big Future, they have a scholarship search engine that is free to use. FastWeb and scholarship.com are also reputable sources that I feel comfortable in offering to you as good resources for searching for private scholarships. Keep in mind, those are all national, so they're getting thousands of applications. So again, I'm much more focused typically on the scholarships from local community. Another source of assistance, particularly if mom or dad, you have served our country, there are benefits that your children may be eligible for. Again, when we look at the post 9/11 benefits, yellow ribbon is something you might want to ask about. Schools offer additional benefits to accompany the base VA benefits, veterans benefits to a student. So those would be things that I would suggest you look at as well. Special circumstances. As you'll hear shortly, the FAFSA is based upon income that is 2 years old. So if the student is applying as a senior for the 2022-2023 academic year, they're going to be reporting parent 2020 income. So that's still a period of COVID. You may still be recovering from COVID. So 2020 income, while it's required to complete the FAFSA, it may not be the best view of your family. And so there's a process, change in circumstances, special circumstances, professional judgment. You might hear it talked about in all of those different ways. These are the kinds of things that are in the clouds here that schools most frequently will consider. So as I just said, the change in circumstances, your FAFSA, your base FAFSA is going to be based on 2020 income. If your 2021 income decreased, you're going to need to report that information directly to each school. So by researching what's that school's process. Again, most schools I find now have something that talks about, again, change in circumstances, special circumstances, or appealing. Those are the words generally. And a lot of times there are forms now. So rather than just writing a long letter and describing, schools are required to document the circumstances. And so I know at Notre Dame we have a very specific process, because there's nothing more frustrating as a family to send a letter only to have me 2, 3, 4 weeks later to say, oh, we really needed this. So we try and tell families up front, if you've lost income, then these are the documents we need you to do. So again, research that a little bit before you submit, so you know what the school will need to evaluate. Again, it might not be loss of income. Maybe it's extraordinary medical expenses. So again, those are kinds of things. Those are communicated directly with the school and not with the central processing system that processes the FAFSA. It's done the FAFSA is done electronically. You can't send additional information with the FAFSA. That's a communication, again, with the school. Keep in mind that a change in circumstances or appeal, request for additional aid, may not have an outcome of a yes. Or if it has a yes outcome, we can give you more. It may not all be in gift aid. None of it may be in gift aid. So just realize you're entitled to ask. We welcome you asking. Just know that the response might be no change, or it might be a combination of resources. So applying for aid. Again, I've mentioned numerous times the FAFSA, the free application, starting October 1. So gear up, you parents and students who are seniors. October 1, just a few weeks away for October 21. 22, 23. So those of you who are seniors, as early as of October 1, just a few weeks away, can start your FAFSA application using the 2020 tax information. And it uses assets as of the time of application and the household size and number in college, who will be in the house and who will be in college during the 22-23 academic year. The CSS Profile also will become available October 1 for the 22-23 academic year. It uses multiple years. So it's going to ask for 2020, estimated 2021, and guesstimated 2022. And I'm not going to go in because we don't have enough time. But again, it's a much more robust data set, which is one of the reasons we use it at Notre Dame, because I can get a much better picture, a financial picture, kind of like the admission application. If all I did was ask for test scores, I'm going to get a very narrow view of a student. My experience of the FAFSA is it's a very narrow view. The CSS Profile is a much more holistic view of a family's resources, where it's a snapshot in time, but it gives me an idea of where they are and where they're going in the couple of years ahead. So I just want to take some brief views of the FAFSA. So the FSA ID, Federal Student Aid ID. So a parent, at least one parent, needs an FSA ID, and the student needs an FSA ID. I would encourage you to get these FSA IDs ahead of time, before October 1, if that's when you plan to start. And I've given you the address. This is what the screen looks like now. Again, the reason a parent needs one is that's how you're going to sign the FAFSA electronically. And again, the student is the primary applicant with parent information added. So again, if you've got multiple students in college and you're going to do more than one FAFSA, the parent can sign with their same FSA ID, but then you need 2 student FSA IDs. So those travel with you throughout the reapplication over a 4-year period if the student's working on a 4-year degree. This is what the FAFSA website should look like to you when you go there. So again, apply for aid, and then there's different things. I can see the aid process, I can manage my loans, but this is where you're going to go to, this is the student aid website. You can do FAFSA on a mobile device. I've done it. And I'm not the greatest on mobile devices. I thought it was going to be harder than it was. It was okay. I'd prefer to do it on a PC. And so I would opt out of this, but again, my kids thought this was fine. One of the things that is available to families is what is called the IRS Data Retrieval Tool, or the DRT. I'd encourage you, if you can, to use the DRT. There are some families, so again, I'm not going to go into all different circumstances, but if you file as a head of household, you're not going to be able to use the data retrieval tool from the IRS. The data won't transfer correctly. So there are some families the data retrieval tool will not work for. The system will tell you that. But it allows you to go from the FAFSA. You can say, yes, I want to use the data retrieval tool. You will be taken over to the IRS website. You will have to authenticate within that website, and then you will say, yes, transfer the data to my FAFSA. The tool will pick that information up. It will say data is transferred, and you'll go back into your FAFSA and you'll get a summary screen that says, this is what transferred from the data retrieval tool. So you choose whether or not you want to do that. And again, if the tax record is found, it will automatically populate the specific fields within the FAFSA. It should reduce the amount of documents that the financial aid office may request from you to verify the data. Dependency status. Again, I'm not going to go into all of the different reasons, but seniors in high school, 99% are going to be dependent students. This is not connected to any kind of tax dependency. There are a series of questions the student answers, and if no is the response to all of those questions, then the student is dependent. Questions that would make them independent. Do they have a child of their own that makes them independent, that they're providing more than half the support? Are they married? Are they a veteran? So parents, be cautious when you're completing this form. You're not answering for you, you're answering for the student if you're the one completing the form. So again, majority of students in high school are going to be dependent students, and that means both parent and student are going to provide income and asset information. In terms of the financial information that is requested, it's wages, investment income, business income. So things that appear on a tax return. So adjusted gross income is the primary thing that is requested. Untaxed income, the best suggestion I can give to you is read the instructions. Biggest mistake, I make it too. I'm just going to guess. I don't have any untaxed income and I'm not going to read the instructions. The most common errors that we see are people who have a 401k or a 403b or perhaps a 457 plan, and on their W-2 in box 12, there's a D or an E. Those amounts are considered untaxed income. The other thing we see most frequently missed is child support. By definition, most untaxed income is not going to be on a tax return. But ironically, tax-exempt interest is a form of untaxed income that appears on a tax return. So again, that's why I say read the instructions, make sure that you go through. Failing to report untaxed income can really change a family contribution in the methodology, and you want to try and have the best data up front so that you get the best offer up front. Taxes paid, it's a line item from a tax return. It is not the amount withheld on the W-2 statement. For the FAFSA, assets include cash, savings, and checking. If a family has property other than their primary home, and or they also have investments excluding retirement, then the equity in those things, in the real estate. So I have, let's say, a second home, and I have cost minus debt is $50,000, and I have $50,000 in non-retirement, then I have $1,000 in net equity. Again, we often see this question missed. There's also a question that talks about the kind of tax return that you filed, and if you filed a Schedule 1. That matters in the data that you will be asked to report, so look at the tax return when you're doing that FAFSA process. As I mentioned, excluded from the FAFSA are your place of primary residence, your home, and retirement assets. Most businesses are excluded from federal formula as well as family farms. On the FAFSA, parent, at least a parent has to sign and a student. And the format for submitting signatures, the preferred way would be electronically using the FSA ID. You can print a paper signature page. You actually can do a paper FAFSA. I haven't seen anyone doing those. It's more expeditious to do everything online. Once you submit the application, and again, you'll see on the application itself, you're going to code the application and say, I want my FAFSA results to go to these schools. And there will be a section on the FAFSA where you'll put in the school code, and those schools will receive the information. You as a family are going to receive an email notification of what's called a Student Aid Report, or a SAR. That SAR is going to come to the email address that was provided on the FAFSA application, usually the student. Not going to go through these. I said kind of some of these again. Read the instructions. Take the extra time. This is a student application. If a parent is completing it, don't make the mistake of putting your Social Security number, because that is just going to be a disaster for the application overall. Make sure it's the students, make sure it's their formal given name, and that it matches the Social Security number. You're going to look, the custodial parent is the one who's going to complete the FAFSA if there's a divorce or a separation. Again, those are defined within the FAFSA. Don't combine incomes. If there are two parents and both are working, make sure you report those separately, because that's important in how the formula runs. Know that if you did a rollover of a retirement plan, most of the time we see that when someone changes a job, the data retrieval tool cannot distinguish that that was a rollover, so you'd have to look to see. It's probably going to take the whole amount that was in a rollover. You can change that data field. Again, I talked about taxes paid. I talked about the real estate. And again, the household size is going to be who's in the house during the 22-23 academic year. That includes the student for whom you're completing the application. You can make corrections after the application has been filed, and that is done through the FAFSA on the web, and the student logs back in using the FSA ID. They can use the paper SAR. I wouldn't recommend it. I do the on the web. And then the school also might ask for information, and they can submit corrections. We at Notre Dame, we prefer to make the corrections. Again, if a family wants to make them, that's fine, but we prefer to do that for the family. Very quickly, this is a look at the CSS profile, and this is what the page should look like. This is what it looked like last week. So you can see that the 22-23 application is not available yet, and that's what you'd see if you go to the FAFSA site right now, 22-23, October 1, it'll come forth. Again, I already talked a little bit about why schools use the CSS profile. When I look at financial aid notifications, know that they're not all going to come at the same time. And again, this can be very confusing as well. So admissions programs vary, and financial aid letters, therefore, come at different times. What do I mean by programs vary? Well, there might be an early decision program. There might be early action. Maybe the school, I know in Indiana, we are what would be called a single release school. We have early decision and our early action, and we send our notices for those students out in mid-December. We send our financial aid notices out for those students in February. Purdue, on the other hand, is in our state. They start admitting students, and they are on a rolling basis. And so they start rolling out financial aid decisions. So again, the admission program type typically drives what happens in the release of financial aid notifications. Know what you're receiving. Is the information about costs, is it actual or is it subject to change? Again, if it's a state institution, usually there's a process where the state sets the tuition and fees. So make sure that you understand how or will my financial aid decision change if the costs change this year or in the future is an important question as well. Most state grants, my experience, at least in Indiana, is we don't get that information. We still don't have the final information for 21-22 for our students. So we estimate those state grants. What does the school do? Will it, if they estimated $2,000 and the student gets $1,500, is the school going to give the student $500, or are you going to come up with $500 more? So that's an important question if state grants are included. And I would imagine in Illinois, again, it's going to depend on each individual school. The law requires all schools to send what is, we call it financial aid conditions and information. There's consumer information that must be sent with a financial aid offer. I really encourage you to read through the terms and conditions of the aid that is being offered. And if you don't understand, feel free to call the financial aid office. It's important that you understand the offer that's being given. So again, your next steps: apply for admission. Again, you're probably early in that process, but create that federal student aid ID. Submit your FAFSA after October 1. You'll get your student aid report by email. Look at it, make sure you didn't make any data entry errors. And then if a financial aid office asks for additional information, send that information. Some use a process through the College Board called IDOC. Some want you to send it directly to them. So each school, again, has a little bit different process. My checklist, again, read what comes with your letter. There is a good tool on the College Board website called the Online Comparison Tool that might be helpful. Again, keep in mind you're not comparing apples to apples. So don't just look at this one gave me more than this one, because remember, cost is where we start, right? So what you want to get to is what's going to be my out-of-pocket expense after scholarships and grants are coming off. Then what if I'm offered a loan? What's left? So again, kind of walk through and understand what is my out-of-pocket cost. Again, go through change of circumstances if you have things that you don't think were considered up front. The next one seems to be kind of obvious. Let the financial aid office know if you're going to accept their offer and if you plan to attend. Many times the student just doesn't answer the email. We appreciate it when a student says, thanks for working with us, but I've decided to go elsewhere. We understand that, and we wish that everyone would enroll, but we know that that's not going to happen. So let them know. And let a financial aid office know if you've received private scholarship. By law, the financial aid office must incorporate those resources into the financial aid offer. And again, that's another consumer question to ask. If I get an outside scholarship, how will that change, or will it change my financial aid offer? So I know we have a few more questions that are out there, and we're probably a minute or two over time already, so I want to be mindful of that. But if Mr. Coy or Mr. Kane, if we have a few minutes, I'm happy to answer those questions.
Yep, we sure do. And we've got a couple of questions here. So the first question, do you have to report IRA money that it was inherited from a death of a parent?
That's a great question. So if it is a taxable event, they're probably going to see it on a tax return. The IRA itself, if it just rolled over from the IRA as an inherited rollover IRA, the principal amount of the IRA is not reported because it's a retirement. But again, sometimes we'll see taxable IRA. So let's take the IRA out of it and say that was a one-time receipt of money. That's a question you could ask the financial aid office of. I got this inherited IRA. It was taxable. Could we remove that from the evaluation and reconsider my aid because it was one-time income?
The next question is more just, I think, a repeat of just repeating what you said. They were asking, so you don't use combined incomes when filling out the FAFSA?
If we're talking about a divorced or separated family, you would only report the income and asset information of the custodial parent. If that custodial parent is remarried, then it would be that household's income and assets. The non-custodial parent information is not reported on the FAFSA. If we're talking about when I talked about wages, what you want to make sure that you do is if a mom and a dad are both working, report mom's wages separately and dad's wages separately. So I'm not exactly sure which question was being asked, Kevin.
Yeah, I don't know either.
So hopefully by giving both answers, I've given a comprehensive answer.
Yeah, and then I think the next question is kind of piggybacking off of that one as well. It's more of a situation where the child's father pays child support, but has already made it clear that he's not paying for college. He makes a lot of money through his job and his income property, and they're afraid he'll hurt the financial aid package. Do they have to include him?
Sure. So let me answer that in, again, I'll repeat for the FAFSA, the custodial parent, income and assets only, non-custodial, not required for federal aid, state aid, and I would say the majority of colleges and universities. There are schools, Notre Dame is one, where we will ask for that non-custodial parent information. We also will ask for the story around the relationship with that parent and then make a good judgment philosophically. And I know this doesn't always work out the way we hope. Parents divorce one another, they don't divorce the children. So again, I heard that there is a statement a parent is not going to contribute. That's between those parents, but some schools may calculate a parent contribution from a non-custodial parent. Don't shy away from schools who ask for that information. That's a conversation you should have if you have concerns about that.
Let's see. There was one that was, I think I answered it, but I just want to be clear with you. It was regarding, let me see if I can find it. Students with IEPs, what type of federal aid is available, or would it depend on the school? So students with disabilities.
Sure. I think that's going to depend on the school. And I'd have to say, vocational rehab benefits, I think, are now administered by state. We don't see many voc rehab anymore. It travels a different way. So I think that would be a good question to ask the individual school, what kind of resources. I know at Notre Dame, we have a specific center and they provide tutoring and those kinds of resources for students.
Okay. Let's see. And I think just going back, because I think some missed the answer to the question earlier regarding the merit scholarships request. Why do merit scholarships request the FAFSA? I guess can you explain that one again?
Sure. My experiences as merit aid programs, you don't have to file a FAFSA or any kind of basis for financial evaluation. You can, because a student can receive merit aid and need-based aid, they can coexist. But strict merit aid is typically not going to ask for any financial information.
Okay. And the last question coming up is how does having a second child in school help?
So a second child in college at this time, it basically divides on the FAFSA, it divides the family contribution, the parent contribution, pardon me, in two. And so there's an amount and then it's divided into half for one, half for the other. So when that second one graduates, that contribution would all be considered available for the single student.
Okay. And then another question that came in, and special programs or resources for students with disabled veterans programs, is that college to college, or how do they go about that?
So I don't know by the question, is this a child of a disabled veteran or the student
Sounds like
could be an adult?
sounds like the student is a
Child of a
child
disabled
of a
veteran.
disabled veteran. Yes.
So the first thing I would look at would be veterans benefits and what are the benefits that are available. There are many chapters. So again, you're going to find VA, usually on campuses, you're going to find a veterans center, a VA center or whatever. At Notre Dame, we have two places. The registrar's office certifies VA benefits, but then we also have a Veteran and Military Affairs office. And then our office is also engaged in those. Because again, we have programs that are called like Yellow Ribbon if it happened again post 9/11. There are matching programs called Yellow Ribbon programs, and again, those vary from school to school, but there are a number of chapters of veterans benefits that a student might be able to benefit from. So I'd explore those through the Veterans Administration or through the school.
Okay. And then just to confirm, so when the schools or the FAFSA is asking for income, they're asking for the adjusted gross income from taxes?
Yes. So what you're going to see, if you are not able to use the data retrieval tool or choose not to, the FAFSA instructions are going to give you the specific line item off the tax return. And it's going to ask you for adjusted gross income. And then again, it's going to ask, the next question will be taxes paid. It's not off the W-2. It's going to be a line item off the tax return.
Okay. I don't see any other questions coming through, at least right now. So, and then just to reiterate, this recording will be posted on our college planning page. Just give us some time. We have to have it closed caption, and then we're going to post on our college planning page. We'll probably also have the counselors send it through their Google Classroom. So the students should be receiving that as well. And then we will also post the PowerPoint for this as well. So in case anyone showed up late and missed something, it will be posted. So no need to worry.
And thank you for everyone for hanging in there tonight. I know at this time of night, listening to financial aid information is not the most exciting, but hopefully I was able to answer your questions and clarify information you might not have understood before. So Kevin, thanks again for inviting me to be with your families. I always appreciate spending time with your group.
And I echo that, Mary. Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to have your experience here and expertise here to talk to our family. So I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Brad. You as well.
Thank you, Mary. Absolutely.
Sure. All right. Okay. So that concludes the night. So thank you very much for attending. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Mr. Kane. And other than that, have a wonderful night.
Thank you so much.